Jayne Kirkham, as we've discussed, the main purpose of this interview is not so much for you to criticise other political parties, but for us to get an idea of what Labour would do. And one of the things that a lot of people say they're concerned about, because traditionally they associate Labour with being the party of high taxes, is that you would put taxes up if you ran Cornwall Council. Now, you voted against the current administration's plans to increase council tax by just under 5%, but you didn't put forward an alternative. What would you put forward if you were running the council? What do you think is a fair rate of tax for Cornwall Council?
I think it's really difficult at the moment because the current tax system, current council tax, is so regressive and so unfair, which was part of our problem with it. It's based on a system that goes back to 1990 and your property values then. The government have for a number of years now been putting a precept on for social care, which we think should be funded centrally anyway and shouldn't come out of council tax. It's been like this for a long time, and the tax system is completely out of sync. Also, central government have been pulling back a lot of money from councils, from local government to central government. So our funding is so depleted. So we're really struggling. So from a Labour government point of view, we see that the tax system needs a complete overhaul, really. It needs changing. Local taxes don't work. Central taxes don't work. The balance between them won't work at all unless that's looked at completely and changed. So I think a crude answer really would be a review of the tax system and to freeze everything at inflationary level on council tax until that's done, because Cornish people have been really struggling through COVID, really struggling for a number of years with the amount of taxation that they're expected to pay. And this year, when you're looking at the PCC increase, you're looking at council tax, you're looking at town council precept, it's just a huge burden for Cornish people to bear. So we think the whole system should be reviewed, basically.
Well, that's fine, but it doesn't go anywhere near answering my question. 4.9% is what we've got. Would Labour be more than that or less than that?
We voted against it because we considered that it is not possible to do that. We think the Liberal Democrats and the Independents were doing certain things wrong with the money that they had. We would not do some of those things. Obviously, we would change that. But overall, we're not in administration. We do not agree with the tax system.
No, but presumably the reason that you're taking
it will be very different next year. We will be looking at we will be looking at things differently, and we will make those choices then. But this year we really didn't want to pass that tax increase. It was just completely unfair on local Cornish people.
Yeah, but presumably the reason you're taking part in the election is because you do want to be in power, and voters are entitled to know what you would do. Now, 4.9%, higher or lower?
What, this year? This coming
year? What would you do? Let's suppose you're making a budget next year.
But we can't say what would happen next year, Graham. We don't know. And we are hoping next year, for goodness sake, that there will be some sort of sensible resolution about social care. That 3% should never have been there. Now, next year, if we're looking at social care in a properly funded central way, then that 3% won't be there for a start. So we'll be looking at an inflationary rise, and that's a completely different kettle of fish. So we have to wait and see if the government actually tackles some of these big issues that they've been putting off and running away from for 10 or 11 years before we can answer questions like that.
Right. So you don't have an answer.
Well, not for next year. No, we know what we should be seeing, and when we get there, obviously we'll make those decisions.
Let's suppose that Labour is in power and you put forward a budget and the other parties vote against it, but they don't put forward any alternative. Do you not think that you would be entitled to criticise them if they did that?
Yeah, but the opposition is the opposition, and we're not running the government or the administration. So we're entitled to say that simply isn't good enough, and we don't agree with it, and it's good enough for the people of Cornwall.
I give up on taxation. On house building, the council's current approach to housing involves building some new houses for sale or rent on the open market and acting a bit like a private property developer. Is that an approach that Labour supports? And if not, what would you do differently?
Well, it's pretty clear, hopefully, from our manifesto that Labour wants more truly affordable homes for Cornwall. So homes built under the housing revenue account. So we're talking about council houses, really. We're talking about social housing. We're looking at more emergency housing. Obviously, the council have put aside 39 million to look at emergency housing because people are being housed in campsites and caravan sites and in Premier Inns at the moment. It's desperate. It really is desperate. And the way things are at the moment, with the 80% of market value meant to be affordable, just doesn't work at all. So a Labour administration would be looking at more truly affordable homes. So we would be looking at building from the HRA account. We would be looking at all sorts of other ways like cooperative housing, Beauty Land Trust, lots of other groups do that kind of thing. And that investment vehicle, we certainly wouldn't be using it as a house building investment vehicle. We'd be looking at, if we were going to invest as Cornwall Council, or even actually, I'm on the pensions committee, and we've done a lot of work on the pensions committee looking at what the pensions, local government pension scheme invests in. And there is now some leeway within the rules to look at investing with some of the pensions money. So then you're looking at social investing, you look at investing in green energy, in our high streets, in other things. Now, the current administration set a target of 3.5% return. Now we could look at that again. We could use that investment to do something else, and we should be building more truly affordable and council and social housing ourselves, and leaving there's the issue with the planning as well, isn't there? That the new planning white paper is talking about how many affordable houses should be built and whether it should be over 10 or over 40 or 50 or something. And you have to look very carefully at that. But then we've got the question of what's affordable, and what is considered to be affordable at the moment isn't affordable. So you have to look at that completely again in the round, and talk about maybe linking affordability to local wages rather than market values, that kind of thing.
Okay, I mean, that's a perfectly coherent deconstruct, if you like, of what's wrong with the present system. But my question was, would you maintain Cornwall Council's role as a private property developer, selling houses or renting houses on the open market? Is that really what local authorities should be doing?
It wouldn't be our first choice for doing that, no. We would look again at how we use that investment vehicle.
So would you stop doing things? You'd look at it again. Would you stop?
We'd have to look at exactly where all those different projects had got to, what the situation was, what the finances was. I know some of it, but not all of it, and then reconsider it again. But yeah, we would be looking at a different direction, because we want to provide affordable housing. We don't want to use our council resources to look at building on the private market now.
All right. Some people would argue that Cornwall doesn't really have a housing shortage at all. We just have too many houses which are empty for most of the year. What tools do you have that might fix that problem so that the housing market does actually benefit local people?
Yeah, I mean, we have got a problem in that we do have a lot of empty homes, basically homes that are empty for most of the year, in fact. Now, you will have heard Cornelius Olivier, because he's been talking about it for about 8 years, talking about the tax loophole on second homes. And that is something that the government has said it is closing, but it kind of hasn't really closed. It's announced a review of it. So we would want to properly close that loophole, and we would want to look again at taxing second homes, and look at a kind of a levy, even doubling the council tax. I mean, some places up in Yorkshire, they're talking about quadrupling council tax on empty second homes. It's something we really seriously think we should be looking at. Obviously, we don't have the power to do that at the moment. We'd be pushing government for the power to do that. And what we would want to do, in fact, there was previously, I think about 2 or 3 years, Labour did look at a policy of doing that and then putting it in a ring-fenced account for affordable housing. Now, we'd want to do that, but not a national one, a local Cornish one, because Cornwall is where the problem is. Cornwall is where the taxes would be coming in from those second homes. So Cornwall is where we would want to spend that money. There are other.
Now, let's just pick up on what you said about Yorkshire. I mean, the idea of a punitive rate of council tax on second homes is very interesting. A quadrupling of the rate in Yorkshire. Would you support a quadrupling of the rate in Cornwall?
Don't know yet. We'd have to look at the figures. I certainly think that if homes are empty for more than a certain number of days per year and people aren't using them, then they should pay double council tax. I do. Yeah, I do think that. Yeah. But to go any further, we'd have to look at it when we get in with our new bunch of councillors.
Sounds like you've got
another couple of things I wanted to say about some of the stuff we could do, because at the moment, particularly where I want to represent in Penwherris, there's a lot of council housing, old council housing, Cornwall housing, and a lot of that has been sold off, and a lot of that is now being rented for holiday lets, or used as second homes, or is being used as HMOs for students. Now, there are covenants in most of the council house deeds that say you can't do that. And last year, the council did start sending out warning letters to tell owners that they couldn't do this any longer and to give them 12 months to do something about it. Now, I have a horrible feeling that nothing much further has happened on that because of COVID. And that's something we pick up again as well, because those houses were built as family homes. They should be used as homes for local working people and local vulnerable people if they can be, if it can be done, or whether they are rented or whether they are bought by them. So we would certainly look at that, and buying back as well, compulsory purchase, all that kind of thing. We started.
Sounds like there are lots of things that you're going to take a look
at. There are lots of tools.
Lots of. On affordable housing, how would you define what is an affordable house? What would an affordable property be in somewhere like Rock or on the Roseland Peninsula? How much would that cost to buy or rent?
It's really difficult to do, isn't it? Because the coastal areas of Cornwall are now so much more expensive than the central areas. So to pick a kind of figure like it has been done at the moment and say, look at 80% of market value is just kind of gibberish, because people, if anything, earn less in the coastal communities than they do in places like Truro. So it means nothing. So I think if you were really going to look at what's affordable, you would have to in some way link it to local wages. There are living rent schemes and all that kind of thing. That's really hard to do in Cornwall because things vary so widely from area to area. And if you start breaking it down into tiny areas, it gets hideously complicated. But there must be a better way of doing it, and other people have worked out a better way of doing it when you can link affordable to wages. But I mean, what we really want to look at is council housing and social housing at proper council and social housing rents. That would be the ideal.
Now, again, some people would argue that Cornwall's housing problems stem directly from our over-reliance on tourism. And yet when Keir Starmer visited Cornwall last year, he spoke of the need for even greater public subsidy for the tourism sector. Yeah. Was he right to do that?
He came down in July, didn't he? And at the time, we were basically in between lockdowns, and Cornwall's industries, particularly the tourism industry, were really, really struggling. And we had that problem, didn't we, that the government had given us grants, business grants, to pass on to local businesses. And we had been able to pass on certain amounts, but the rules were a little bit strict, or they weren't applied properly, depending on whether you're the Liberal Democrats or the Conservatives. So some of them was left, some of the money was left in a pot. There were millions of pounds left in a pot that we couldn't get to. And a lot of the industries that Keir Starmer would have spoken to when he came down here were pretty much desperate and on their knees. It was something that needed a solution and needed it fast. They weren't sure how they were going to survive the winter. So that was really what he was talking about, I think, at that moment. Cornwall, yes, we do have this massive tourist industry. We have had it for a long time. It will probably always be a part of what we do, but it shouldn't be the whole of what we do, should it? Even, I think I heard even Malcolm Bell recently say that tourism should be more sustainable and spread more across the year, because we get this massive glut of people in the summer when our beaches get clogged up. You get, at the moment, you're getting, last summer, it did go crazy. There were camper vans everywhere. You couldn't get to the beaches. It has to be more evenly spread. It has to be more sensibly done. It has to be more sustainable. You have to look at the kind of the green and the long-term tourism, not just cramming as many people into Cornwall as you possibly can in the summer holidays. So yes, it will be part of our economy, but it could be done so much better. And there are a lot of other things in Cornwall that should be a bigger part of our economy. We should be looking at our green energy. We should be looking at our digitech. We should be looking at our agri-food and our agriculture industries, and making much more of a big deal of them, putting much more investment into them and rebalancing the economy we've got, because we've got this seasonal, low-paid, short-term economy at the moment. And that needs, I mean, Malcolm Bell was right, for tourism, it needs rebalancing. But for the whole of the Cornish economy, that needs rebalancing. And one of the things that Starmer did talk about when he came down here, which was good, was Labour's idea in the 2019 manifesto of regional investment banks. Now, regional, proper regional, we're not talking about like sticking one in Bristol and saying that covers the southwest. Maybe one for the far southwest, so that those decisions made about what to use that money for can be made within Cornwall by the people who know what would be good for Cornwall, rather than made either at regional level, because we found out what happens at regional level with planning decisions. Planning decisions made in Bristol have no relevance whatever to Cornwall. So it probably would be the same with investment decisions as well. They need to be brought right down here to where they're being affected.
I mean, really, it boils down to whether tourism should be encouraged or discouraged, and if so, to what extent. Your manifesto.
It's not a big part of an economy.
Your manifesto says nothing about a tourism tax. Why not?
Yeah, I saw that. We did. It's just something that's been bandied around for years now. I mean, Cornelius said recently when we talked about this, he brought it up in the last Economy Scrutiny Committee. We need to look again at a tourism tax. We need to do a feasibility study. Obviously, we don't have tax raising powers.
Well, is Cornelius Olivier correct? Is he right to do that? Do you agree with him?
I think it's definitely an idea that people should be looking at. It's been looked at for years. It could be looked at again. Yeah, they do it in other countries, don't they? They do it in places like Barcelona. You have a small nightly tax. It would be an interesting way of looking how to do it, how to collect it. Of course, that would be tricky. How do you do it with Airbnbs? Should the onus fall on B&Bs, registered B&Bs and hotels? How would it be? How would it work out? How much would it be? How much would it impact on tourism? You would obviously get kickback from some of the people who think they may be affected. But yeah, I think it's an idea that's certainly worth looking at again, more closely.
You've got a lot to look at, haven't you? Let's move on to health and social care. It could be argued that the new integrated care system strengthens the voice of Cornwall Council within the local health ecosystem, if you like. But Labour currently seems uncertain about what its position is. In Labour-controlled Manchester, for example, you might understand their enthusiasm, but in Tory-controlled councils, you might also understand why Labour voters would worry about budget cuts and privatisation. Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party was quite clear in its opposition to integrated care systems. What is Labour's position now?
The integrated care system in Cornwall, I worry about at the moment. I think it's being rushed into. I think at the moment we have a joint accountable officer who is conflicted because, right, the idea of an integrated care system is great, isn't it? You don't want competing providers. You don't want everybody arguing with each other. We all like the idea of one system so everybody can see everyone's computer system and know what's going on. And you don't have to tell your story 3 different times to 3 different people who come and see you. It's kind of a no-brainer. People want to be supported when they need it without having to jump through 15 different hoops for 15 different providers. So yes, the idea of integrating everything, great. It's not being done properly at the moment. If you look at the white paper, even then they talk about, you know, the 3 legs, but they talk about the NHS and social care and public health. Now, the way public health is funded, public health funding, since it went over to councils, has been flatlined for about, well, when I look at the graph, it kind of goes like that in Cornwall, so for years. So public health isn't being funded properly. Social care isn't being funded properly. We've said that. It's being pushed onto council tax and not thought about centrally at all. So the NHS is the only thing that's being funded centrally. Even that's not being done properly in Cornwall, because the money we get in Cornwall isn't fair funding compared to other places in the country. So you can't put those 3 systems together when one is means tested and underfunded, one is funded centrally, one has just been seemingly forgotten, even though there's a pandemic, and say, there you go, there's an integrated care system, off you go, get one person to run it, because there will always be conflicts there. And there must not be more privatisation. We've tried things like Mighty and RCHD, it hasn't worked, and they're reversing it now. And we're looking at all the problems with the sexual health system and how that prompted litigation. And there's been further litigation. There are arguments going on now within our supposedly integrated care system about bills from one part of the system to another. It doesn't work. If we're going to do this, we would have to do it in a completely different way with a completely different starting point. We really, well, we said it, Labour have said it before, we need a proper national care system in the way we've got a national health service. And without that, it's impossible to do it properly.
In Cornwall, we've got a relatively high number of small, privately run residential care homes. Would a Labour-controlled council end its contracts with any of those homes that either failed to pay the living wage to its care staff or failed to pay full wages to any of those staff who are forced to self-isolate because of COVID?
That's not happening. You're quite right. That isn't happening in some of the businesses in Cornwall. It's really difficult in Cornwall because you're right. We have this really fragmented system of small providers. Yes, ultimately we would want to enforce those contract terms, but if it left people in the meantime without, if we're taking people out of dementia care homes, that would just be dangerous. So yes, of course we would want to do that, and we want to look again at social care in Cornwall completely. Now, we've had situations like Trafula recently, where care homes are basically going bust because they can't make any money, and Cornwall Council has bought them, or bought that one particularly, and run it. Now, we can't see any problem with doing that in future, kind of not nationalising care, but bringing care under local control. And why not do that? And why not do that more? And why not look at other ways of running domiciliary care? At the moment, a lot of it's run by agencies, and the workers get paid their £9.50 an hour foundation living wage if they get it, and then the agency get up to £19 an hour the profit there. Now you look at some of the places are bringing in care cooperatives, things like that. There are other ways to organise it, and we would want to look at that a lot more closely and do those kind of things in Cornwall. Why not have our own care homes? Why not have care run in a different way?
This goes on the list of things to take a look at.
But they're doing it now, to be fair, slowly. Scary, but we would do it more.
All right, we've got two minor injury units in Cornwall, Saltash and Foy, which have been closed for years. Now, those buildings are old, they're run down, they were expensive to maintain. They weren't fit for purpose, but the service has not been reinstated in any way. Is it acceptable to make people travel an extra 10 or 20 or 30 miles for treatment? And what would Labour do?
No, it's not acceptable. We've looked at this in health scrutiny. We've looked at Edward Hayne, and we've looked at the numbers, and people are being put in community hospitals in faraway places as kind of Stratton and Lewes in the east, and people can't get to their families, and that's crazy, and that's not fair. And the health service, the system are talking about reviewing the way that happens and putting care in the right places, but it's not done yet. It's not done yet, and people are travelling. So until that is done, people need to be looked after closer to home, and they need proper care closer to home in properly designed and decent buildings with the staff. We don't have the staff in Cornwall either at the moment, so it feels like we literally are kind of staggering from a crisis to crisis and putting sticking plasters on it. So, for example, the Edward Hayne thing, there was that supposed private care home in Penzance who are going to be commissioned, and I don't know whether they're open yet. I haven't heard anything about it after that. I very much doubt they are, but we can't just shut things down until we've got provision in place, and that is something that a Labour council would be really, really strong about and important, and it's just so crucial that you can't be moving people all over Cornwall. So yes, of course we'd look at that again. The problem is, as you know, Graham, that those buildings are now, they've all been transferred to NHS property estates. They're all owned centrally. So if they were sold, we would then have to bid for some of that money back to do something with it. Now, I know they've been looking at other options. I think in Foy they were looking at the idea of, I think it was an NHS nursing home, and they would have to look again and see what the need was there. So maybe there are other things that can be done and better buildings that should be used. But if we need more buildings, we need more buildings, we can't just cut.
I need to get in a quick question on COVID. Last year, there were elements in the council which were part of the lobby for Cornwall to be placed in tier 1 for social movement restrictions. Was Cornwall right to lobby for tier 1? Do you agree with those who suggest that it was responsible to some extent for the explosion of cases in Cornwall that we saw in November and December?
It was a hard thing, wasn't it? Nobody really knew what would happen with the tiering system. There was concern. Labour, Keir Starmer was calling for lockdowns much earlier than, I think, September, wasn't it? A long time before Boris Johnson actually did it. The evidence, I think, seemed to show that it wasn't so much the tourism in the summer that caused the rise, but maybe the schools and the universities going back, it did seem to tie in with the September, October. And then with all the confusion towards Christmas, of course, and people mixing in their homes, if you talk to the public health director, Rachel Wigglesworth, she seemed pretty sure that it was that kind of social mixing and local mixing within workplaces and within homes towards the end of the year that really caused that massive explosion in January when COVID really, really took off in Cornwall, and it got quite scary. And then we did, of course, have to have the lockdown. So it's questionable. And after not very long in Tier 1, a lot of people were thinking, well, hang on, is this really such a great idea? Because of course people were moving around the country and there were no restrictions. But I'm not 100% sure. I mean, we're opening up again, aren't we? We're going to have to be really careful this summer, because if you look at the G7 that's been kind of plonked on us, roughly the same weekend that we'd decided to put the Shanty Festival online, suddenly we're having the G7. So we're opening up again this summer, and it's happening already, but we just have to be really careful in the way we do it, and do it slowly, because if we have a sudden massive influx and the whole thing starts again, then we're back in the same position.
I mean, it's interesting that you should mention the G7. I hadn't planned to ask you about the G7, but since you've raised it, if Labour wins the Cornwall Council elections in May,
oh my goodness me.
It might be a big if, but let us suppose that this is indeed a statistical possibility. Would a Labour-controlled council still welcome the G7, or would you say to Boris Johnson and possibly Joe Biden, don't come?
Oh my goodness, that's a question, isn't it? It is a concern. It is a concern. I mean, people were saying, oh, yes, it could bring things to Cornwall. It could bring a legacy. Well, financially, what we've seen so far is some money for the airport to make it, I don't know, space ready or Air Force One ready, and do some things to the runway. But I can't actually see much more of a legacy coming out of it yet.
So you'd say don't come?
Oh, I don't know. We would have to think about it. I can't make that decision now for all my many Cornwall councillors.
You could take a look at it. Leisure centres. Should there be statutory provision for leisure centres?
You know what? I do think that with the situation with the GLL thing obviously drives me slightly demented, because that was one of the last contracts that we entered into before we became a foundation living wage authority. And I've been banging on for nearly 4 years now. Are we going to renegotiate that contract so that GLL pay foundation living wage? Because they don't in their leisure centres. So that was one big thing that was wrong with the contract, along with all the other things within it. So and it's collapsing, isn't it? GLL do seem to be collapsing. For example, in Falmouth, they didn't want Princess Pavilions anymore. The town council has had to kind of rush to step into the breach and take it on. So I would certainly be saying that well, I know they're going to do talk about reviews. Cornwall Council are going to do a review of leisure services, but I don't think we really need a review of leisure services. I think we need to take them on if we can. Look at the kind of situation. Well, we used to have Tempest, didn't we? Town councils may want to take things on, like Falmouth has. There might be an option there for devolution. There are a lot of other things we could do with the leisure services rather than give them to a great big contractor. So yes, I would be saying that certainly we should be taking back responsibility for them.
All right. On some of the big capital projects, Labour, like all of the other political parties, is clearly divided. For example, the Truro Stadium, not surprisingly, Labour candidates from the Penzance area will be supporting the idea of a Truro Stadium because it supports a local privately run sports club in their area. But equally, Labour candidates from the north and east of Cornwall see it as a huge waste of their public money. Can you say definitively whether Labour would still support the idea of a Truro Stadium?
That was all dependent on £3 million from David Cameron's Conservative government that never came forward, wasn't it? It's so up in the air, isn't it, at the moment, Langgarth and the stadium. I don't even see that it will happen whether we make a decision or not. about it. So
is that an excuse for not making a decision?
it's just not looking promising at all. It was in the wrong place, and yes, there are a lot of other places that a lot of other people would have liked it to be in, and it got kind of plonked in where it is for a lot of other reasons. It doesn't look like it's going to happen at the moment unless a lot of funding is forthcoming from places that it doesn't look like it will be forthcoming from. So again, that might have to be one that we decide when we get back in. I ain't gonna make a commitment to or against.
I'll put you down as a don't know. Your idea of promoting a pasty pound, procuring locally where possible, is clearly very popular. But on contracts of only up to £25,000, it's not really that ambitious, is it? £25,000 is nothing. If you had political control, if you win on the 6th of May, what figure would you set for local procurement?
The 25,
presumably more than £25,000.
Yeah, of course it should. The 25k was a kind of workaround, and that's what places like Plymouth do, because that's what's allowable at the moment in the regulations, that you can award to local businesses or local cooperatives or local organisations of any sort up to, and you can make that a priority. Over 25k, you start getting into the procurement rules, but I think the way that's been looked at is the way it should be looked at is in what these contracts are going to give to Cornwall, looking at the social value of it, looking at the supply chain. And social value is a bit of a wishy-washy term, but you're kind of looking at, if this contract is awarded to this company or this organisation, what would they bring to Cornwall? Who would they train people? Would they provide apprenticeships? Would they give people time off for volunteering? Would they use local suppliers and local supply chains? What would their terms and conditions of employment would be? It's a much bigger thing than just give it to a company with a Cornish postcode. It's break it down, look at what that organisation is going to do for Cornwall and ask them to do more. That kind of procurement, like they're doing up in Manchester and Preston, and the way that they give out contracts or they spend their money is something that they spend a lot of time doing, and they spend a lot of political capital doing. And I think that's where the change needs to come. I think if you're going to do that, it's a massive change in mindset. It would take a lot more energy from officers who would have to completely buy into that idea of doing things for Cornwall and looking at cooperatives and bringing things back in-house and looking at social enterprises and looking at CICs and working out. The Chamber of Commerce have offered to help, offered to put different organisations together to bid for larger contracts if we need them to do that. So there's so much that could be done there. And I think the way they've done it in other Labour councils is they've got that. You have to have really strong political leadership. You have to really push for it and understand what you're doing and why. And I don't think we have that here at the moment. I think the will's there. And I think the Tories like the idea of, let's give it to the Cornish businesses. But it's not just that. It's much deeper than that. And it's a lot more about what it brings to the Cornish economy and people and environment, rather than just, let's just put an office in Cornwall so we've got a postcode on the stationery so we get that contract. It's got to be a lot more than that. And I think we need real leadership politically to filter down through officers to have any hope of doing that in the way it needs to be done. And that's a big thing. That's a big part of our manifesto. And I think if we could do that, you can make a massive change. In Manchester, they've massively increased the amount of money that they spend with not only locally, but with tiny little micro businesses of 10 people or less. And that's what we should be looking at here, because those are the kind of people we've got in Cornwall. They're setting up small businesses left, right and centre. And we've got lots of very innovative people who we should be encouraging and using.
Now, nobody likes losing. Nobody likes losing a general election, and election defeats inevitably bring periods of painful change for political parties. But would you accept that the Labour Party in the last year or so has rather lost focus on almost everything, really? You're outflanked by the Conservatives on corporation tax, you're outflanked by the Green Party on the tourism tax. Aren't you facing really the age-old problem in politics that if you try to occupy the middle of the road, you get run over?
I don't think so. No. I think the Labour Party is the Labour Party. It always has been, always will be. I don't think we've changed our values, and I don't actually think we've changed huge numbers of our policies either. And if you take something like, I don't know, the Green Industrial Revolution that we talked about, the Green New Deal, we're still looking locally and nationally at that. I mean, if you look at our candidates, we've got, I mean, only in Falmouth, we've got Kirsty Edwards, who runs Plastic Free Falmouth. We've got me. I mean, remember that climate, one thing that is annoying me slightly about this campaign, that climate emergency declaration that Cornwall Council called in January 2019. Now, the Liberal Democrats ended up proposing a climate change report to be written in 6 months. They didn't go as far as proposing the climate emergency and the 2030 target. And in fact, the person who did propose that wasn't thanked for it. So it was my amendment. It was a Labour amendment to declare that climate emergency and to bring in that ambitious target. And to do that, I worked with a lot of people in a lot of environmental organisations and talked to them an awful lot. So the stuff like the green industrial, and we're looking, I mean, when we're talking about the investment programme, we're talking about the pensions money, and we're talking about investing in Cornwall. We're talking about investing in our geothermal, in our waves, in our solar, in our geoenergy. We're talking about an anaerobic digester. Cornwall doesn't have, we're talking about collecting food waste and then shipping it up to Devon or somewhere. We should have an anaerobic digester ourselves. We're looking at a circular farmers project here and talking about getting composters, community composters, and dealing with allotments and working with the university. That kind of stuff is still fundamental to what we're doing nationally, but certainly definitely locally as well. So no, I think the Labour Party, if anything, has got more ideas now, particularly down here, and we're going to be pushing on with them.
I didn't really expect you to agree with the premise of the question, but you've got more candidates than ever before. You're going to get more votes in a Cornwall Council election than you've ever had before. But because of the voting system, that won't necessarily translate into more councillors. And again, at the risk of asking a question that I know you won't agree with the premise of it, you might even struggle to hang on to the councillors that you've got already. How many councillors do you think you will have by the 7th of May?
We are now the second biggest party in Cornwall. That's clear. And that's been the case certainly since the June 2017 general election. In Truro and Falmouth, both times actually, we got about 38% of the vote. So really, we should have 38% of the councillors. Now I know that doesn't necessarily translate, but I do think that because we've been steadily increasing our vote, because certainly locally, even though we've been a small group, we've been vocal, we've made, I hope, a bigger impact than our numbers would suggest. And I think people are beginning to realise that we're there and to listen to what we're saying and to trust us. So I'm hoping that more people will put their faith and trust in us this time than ever have before. Certainly, the last local elections were before the massive surge in vote that we had in 2017, 2019. And I really feel that it's very different now. And the Liberal Democrats obviously have struggled a great deal since the coalition and for other reasons recently. And we are the second party now. So I can't see, I mean, I wouldn't want to put a figure on it, but I can't see that there is really not the scope for a lot more Labour councillors, really. And yeah, we may not take control of the council, but we should be a much, much bigger voice than we are. Well, we're still a big voice, but in numbers terms as well, we should have more clout. And I'm really, really hoping that people will see us and see what we're doing and what we're proposing and put their faith in us this time, and we'll get a lot more than the 4 that we've currently.
I'm just trying to get an idea of how you would define on the night a bad result for Labour. Failing to reach double figures?
Oh my goodness, I don't know. We've got 2 marginal constituencies down here now, and we've got
parliamentary constituencies.
Yeah, and the regional
this
party,
isn't a parliamentary election.
No, but the regional party and the national party have looked at that and have thought, right, well then we should have target council seats. So we have seats in those areas and others that we are really, really hoping we will do well in. So I wouldn't put a figure on it, but I certainly hope we get more than we have got at the moment.
In the event that the Conservatives finish as the largest party, as they did last time, but fail to win an overall majority, as they did last time. They'll be looking for coalition partners. Are there any circumstances in which Labour in Cornwall might support a Conservative-led administration, or can you rule it out completely?
I can't see a Labour-Tory coalition. That just goes very hard against the grain. I can see,
even for 2 cabinet places, maybe 3 cabinet places.
I can't see that happening. I can see that if there were certain policies or certain things they were doing, that we would look at those, and because we want what's best for Cornwall. But I can't ever see a Labour-Tory coalition on Cornwall.
I mean, would you rule out what we sometimes call a confidence and supply arrangement, whereby on each individual issue, they might support you?
We would be looking at each individual issue anyway, but we wouldn't be having any agreements about it. We would be looking at each issue on its merits and deciding what's best for Cornwall. No agreements, no arrangements, but deciding what's best for Cornwall on each thing as it comes up.
I mean, as County Hall becomes
more... we're so different. One wants a small state, one wants a state that is involved. I mean, I'm talking about things here about taking things back in-house, taking care in-house, taking transport back in-house, looking again at, oh God, the waste contract, we would have done that with if there was any way of doing it. Now the Tories, their DNA is not like that. It would be very difficult to run a council with people whose ideology was so different.
Okay, it would be very difficult, but are you saying not impossible?
No, I to be honest, Graham, I really can't see that. We'd be looking at each issue as it arose, but I can't see us entering into agreements.
As County Hall becomes more politicised and the voice of the independents increasingly gets squeezed, not only do we see the potential for overall political control, but also perhaps a more coherent opposition arrangement. But in Cornwall, it's going to be made up of lots of different parties. We've got a very fragmented opposition.
In places like Stroud, they have a rainbow coalition.
Yeah, well, do you think there could be a rainbow coalition of opposition in Cornwall?
Again, we have got, well, I've just told you some of them. We have got things that Labour want to do. We will be prioritising the things we want to do. If other parties want to do the things that we think are really important, if they want to look at housing and council and social housing, if they want to look at the green policies, if they want to look at health and social care in the way we do, then yeah, there may be ways of agreeing to do things on certain issues, but we're not going to compromise the things that we feel are important to get cabinet seats or to get seats on committees. So and it depends completely on the numbers, doesn't it? Because as you say, it's a completely new world now, because we've only got 87. We've got these much bigger seats. We don't really know. I mean, you're making an assumption that it won't favour the independents. We don't know that. We're making an assumption it might favour the Tories because they're bigger and they've got the money, and their rural vote they consider to be stronger. I don't think that's going to be the case, particularly for much longer. So we can't really tell what the numbers are going to be yet, and I think it's a bit dangerous to make assumptions and agreements at this stage. I think until we know the numbers, we can't do much more about it. And who knows if there is a very fragmented, if there are, I say opposition, but if the parties get strange numbers of votes, who's to say that the Labour Party may not have a significant number of seats and be able to call the shots and push what we want a little bit more.
Jayne, the people at Zoom are telling me that I'm running out of time. So thank you very much for your time today. You've been very generous with your time, and I know that you're keen to get outside campaigning, get back to the foot slogging of campaigning. So good luck, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Graham.